Welcome back, guys. We trust you've been staying safe. We just hit 200 subscribers and we thank you so much for your support so far. Kindly subscribe to the channel if you already haven't. Even before you start watching this video, help us hit 1,000 subscribers by end of Christmas this year. Thank you. Now, the expression "a fall from grace to grass" is often used, sometimes loosely, but trust you me, there are perfect examples of people who represent this statement, and today's true crime story looks at the life of one such person by the name Lee Murray, a former UFC fighter who would eventually turn out to become a bank robber and then pull off the biggest heist or robbery in the history of the United Kingdom. If you are ready for this true crime story, you know what to do, right? Okay, just buckle up and let's go. Lee Murray had a very tough childhood. It is reported that he had a very tense relationship with his father, and at a point, during a brawl between himself and his dad, he actually knocked his dad out cold. I guess that's what set him on the path of mixed martial arts, because he realized that he had the power to take down bigger opponents. And over time, Murray amassed an 8-2-1 and 1 no contest record in mixed martial arts. I will interpret: he amassed 8 victories, 2 defeats, and 1 draw and 1 no contest record in smaller promotions before he would receive a contract with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, that's the UFC as we know it. In his UFC debut, Murray defeated Jorge Rivera by triangle choke or armbar in the first round, and this was Murray's only fight in the UFC due to complications with his US visa as a result of ongoing criminal prosecution against him in the UK for assault after he attacked a man during a road rage incident. This led to Murray signing with the Cage Rage promotion, which was also short-lived due to injuries resulting from a stabbing, which prevented Murray from continuing his MMA career. So, just like that, the guy who had so much promise in mixed martial arts that at a point he even faced Anderson Silva and went all the way with him to the end of the fight but lost by decision, was suddenly struggling to even stay relevant in the sport, and he couldn't even compete anymore. But if we knew anything about Murray, is the fact that this guy always seems to rise above whatever is put before him, and in a way he keeps escalating towards the negative side every time. That has been the case from his childhood to the point that he had lost his MMA career, and it didn't decline in any way because Murray was not going to disappoint. He deemed himself notorious, and indeed notorious he was. Murray then decided that he was going to pull a heist, and not just any heist. It was going to turn out to become the heist that would be the biggest of its kind in the United Kingdom. And to get this done, Murray would recruit some friends of his, and they would sit down and plot and scheme on how they were going to get this job done. This is when we begin to look at how the former UFC fighter would end up leading a gang of random men to perpetrate the biggest heist in the history of the United Kingdom, where they would end up absconding with over 53 million pounds sterling. That's roughly the equivalent of about $100 million at the time. Yeah, you can't believe it, but he did. He did. Now, this is how the whole thing started, and you would see that they thought this through. They had the mastermind Murray also helping them through the whole process. There was a supervisor who was in charge of this establishment who had the cash in their custody with the task of moving it through various institutions as and when required per the related transactions. Now, this supervisor was called Colin Dixon, and one day, whilst Colin Dixon was on the road in his car, he saw flashing blue lights illuminating behind him in the form of a police car. So, being the law-abiding citizen, Dixon pulled his car to the side of the deserted road he was on. This was around 6 o'clock on the evening of 21st of February 2006, and Dixon had just closed from work at the Securitas Cash Depot in Tonbridge, England, which was 30 miles southeast of central London. Now, this seemed like a normal pullover, and the 52-year-old Dixon, who was the manager of Securitas, didn't make much of it. In his mind, he was just a law-abiding citizen, so he figured that he was getting pulled over by an unmarked police car for a routine traffic stop. Now out stepped a tall, athletic-looking man in a police uniform, who then approached him. Although it would turn out that the cop was no cop at all, and that his uniform was fake and his police badge was also fake. It was actually bought on eBay. His face had been also distorted with the help of a professional makeup artist. And all these things together fooled Dixon, and he was compliant. So Dixon stepped out of his Nissan sedan, and then he was handcuffed by this alleged cop and placed in the back of the so-called unmarked cop car. Dixon would later testify that the driver, a second man in uniform, turned and said menacingly to him, "You will have guessed we are not policemen. Don't do anything silly and you won't get hurt." When Dixon tried to adjust his handcuffs, he says to the officer who had apprehended him, brandished a pistol and barked, "We are not fucking about this. This is a 9mm. And right there and then, Dixon knew that he was in a deep mess. He had been actually abducted. He was blindfolded and transferred to a van, and then taken to a remote farm in Western Kent. Meanwhile, two other fake cops drove to Dixon's home in the nearby town of Hen Bay, along with accomplices in a second van. They were greeted at the door by Dixon's wife, and they explained to her that her husband had been in a serious traffic accident. They said that his wife and the couple's young child needed to accompany them to the hospital. Outside the home, the Dixons were placed in the back of the second van and taken to the farm. This was the same farm where they had taken Dixon. So Dixon was reunited with his family, but all of them were abducted for that matter. So fortunate but unfortunate. At once, relieved and terrified, they were bound and held at gunpoint. Now Dixon was ordered to give the plotters information about the depot. And this is what they said: if you cooperate, no one will get hurt. Otherwise, you will get a hole in you. So this is how the scheme had started playing out. They had kidnapped the manager of the security cash depot and kidnapped his family, and they were going to use his family against him as leverage to get him to do their bidding. A group of at least 7 men then drove to the Securitas depot. Colin Dixon was accompanying a phony police officer in a sedan and his family bound in the back of a large white Renault truck. By now, it was after midnight on the morning of February 22nd. Surveillance video shows Dixon being buzzed into the depot with an officer beside him. Now, mind you, this officer is obviously one of the robbers of Murray's team. So Dixon was readily assisting them, not per his will, but because they had kidnapped his family and he had no choice than to comply with their instructions. Once inside, the fake cop overpowered the security guard and buzzes in the rest of the robbers who were wearing ski masks and armed with high-powered weapons, including an AK-47. Dixon told the 14 staffers working the graveyard shift, that's the night shift, that, I quote, "They've got my family." And he then instructed them not to touch the alarms. He proceeded to deactivate the security system and hand over the keys to the vault. So I guess this was the main reason why the people decided to abduct Dixon and his family. And it had worked out. The Dixons and the staff were then bound and placed in a metal cage, normally used for storing cash. The truck can be seen backing up to a loading dock in the CCTV footage. The robbers clearly knew their way around the depot, where the doors were located and how they locked, and with good reason, because it turns out later that one member of the gang called Emir Haisinaj, a 28-year-old and an Albanian immigrant, was the classic inside man. Please, this is not a movie. This is not a movie. This played out. So they kidnapped the manager, kidnapped his family, used his family as leverage against him to do their bidding, and they were able to get an inside man also. That's classic. Now, months earlier, after just a 10-minute job interview, Haisinaj had been hired for roughly $11 an hour to work the evening shift at the depot. It was later revealed that in the weeks before the robbery, he had come to work wearing a small video camera hidden in his belt buckle. For the next 40 minutes, the gang emptied the vault of its contents, wheeling metal carts filled with cash into the truck. The supply of £10 and £20 notes was so massive that by the time the truck was filled to capacity, it accounted for only 1/4 of the money in the vault. Still, the conspirators absconded with a haul of £53 million sterling, or the equivalent of $100 million at the time. Now, this surpasses the movie called The Bank Job, if you've seen that movie. And it's amazing how an MMA fighter can pull this off with just some random guys. But it tells you, well, that anything you set your mind to do and you persevere towards it, you can do it, but not in this bad way. And all their discipline and meticulous preparation had paid off. Exactly. You could see that this was well thought out and well planned, and there were no surprises against the robbers. No one was physically injured, much less even hit with one bullet. No one had triggered the alarms, and at around 3 a.m., Dixon's child was able to slither out of a metal cage, and the police were summoned. By then, the thieves were back at the farm, dividing up the money. And this was a bounty that one British prosecutor would later characterize as dishonest gain, almost beyond the dreams of the criminals. As investigators worked to crack the case, they began to suspect that the ringleader was Lee Murray, and that he and his pal, Liarusha, were the imposters who had first abducted Colin Dixon. Mario was no stranger to London law enforcement. He spent time in a juvenile detention center as an adolescent and later was tried and acquitted in a serious road rage incident. I think I've touched on that already, but they knew him. They knew him from their dealings. They knew who he was, and ironically, he had also been questioned by police after a traffic stop in the area of the Securitas Depot the summer before the robbery. But he was a prominent figure in pockets of the sports community as well, a fearsome British cage fighter who had recently gone the distance with the great Brazilian champion Anderson Silva. Murray lost that to a decision, but it also gave him that notoriety, and so the police were a bit skeptical about moving in on him without having much evidence to go by. So investigations continue. Now, as the investigations were continuing, the police were very relentless. They had resorted to using all the tactics that they know to help them break the case. And eventually, some tips would start coming in. It is reported that although the gang were so dedicated and meticulous in their operation, it turns out that after the operation, that kind of dedication and meticulous approach to anything they did was just thrown out of the window and they got so sloppy. For example, some of them started bragging to friends about it. That's stupid. Some of them were bragging, and then one of the cars that they used as the getaway car was also abandoned in a field and was set on fire. They had taken so much money, and they didn't seem to have planned what to do after the robbery. It was becoming obvious that they had sat down to plan how to go about the robbery, but they hadn't put in much thought on what to do after the robbery, especially with the cash and the moves that they would make to make sure that they deflect any suspicions that would have come their way. So they were so smart in plotting, but they seemed so stupid afterwards. And police was still unrelenting. Tips came in and arrests started being made. For starters, within 48 hours, police had made their first arrest. Acting on a tip, they apprehended Michelle Hogg, the makeup artist. And guess what? She was the daughter of a policeman. Police found a quantity of latex they alleged Hogg had used to make prosthetic disguises for the robbers. Now, while she was under questioning, Hogg told the police that she was too scared to identify the thieves. Rightly so, because she knows that they are merciless. But later that day, police found the van used to hold the Dixons. The next day, acting on another tip, they located a second van used in the robbery. When they looked inside, they found guns, ski masks, bandanas, and 1.3 million pounds in cash. So, like I said, the stupidity of the gang was still showing. Acting on still another tip, the following day, police raided the homes of Murray's pal, Liarusha, who himself was also an aspiring mixed martial arts fighter, and Rusha's friend, Jetmer Bookpapa. In Rusha's bedroom, police found plans of the Securitas Depot, and hidden in a nearby garage was 8.6 million pounds in cash. How do you do that? How do you do that? Especially when they executed the robbery in military style. Everything was on point. How then do you get so sloppy afterwards? All told, within 10 days, 5 people had been charged, millions of pounds had been recovered, and innumerable additional leads had surfaced. A gang of misfits and bruisers pulled off the biggest robbery ever with considerable criminal error. But they were also stupid. This was a brilliant plan which turned into a farce. One person is quoted as saying, so 5 people were picked up. Now, the fate of the accused was sealed in the fall of 2006 when Hogg, as the British would say, who had now turned the Queen's evidence, testified against her co-conspirators in exchange for her freedom. She explained how she created the disguises so the gang members who posed as police officers couldn't be accurately identified. So now she had turned on them just to get her freedom. I guess it epitomizes the saying that there is no honor among thieves. And on January 28, 2008, after 7 months of trial, during which more than 200 witnesses were called, 5 men, including Russia, Bakpapa, and High Sinaj, the insider, were all found guilty for their part in the robbery and sentenced to a total of 140 years in jail. At the sentencing, authorities urged the public to resist romanticizing what they had done. Fearing for their lives after giving extensive testimony, the Dixons entered the British equivalent of witness protection. And so did Hogg, the makeup artist, who, according to multiple newspaper accounts, currently has a £7 million bounty on her head. This crime was at heart a crime of violence. Now, this was not the end of it. Far from that. Because as the people involved in the crime were being systematically rounded up, Murray apparently did not stand idly by. He left the country. Like I told you, this guy seems to always be ready to escalate and beat whatever challenge that comes ahead of him. He seems to always be thinking 2 steps ahead. So when his people were being picked up, he quickly left the country. By so doing, he left his wife and 2 children behind, and he was accompanied by his friend Paul Allen. Now, according to Kent police, the 2 piloted their car onto a ferry headed for France. Murray is believed to have then traveled from France to Amsterdam to Spain, where he and Allen crossed the Strait of Gibraltar by ferry before finally finding sanctuary in Morocco. But I'm sure you'll be wondering, why Morocco? If Morocco has historically held any certain exotic allure for Europeans, Murray is believed to have gone there for more practical reasons, because don't forget, Murray's father is from Morocco. He's a Moroccan national, and Morocco has no formal extradition agreement with Great Britain. So it was going to be a safe haven for Murray, and that was something he needed so badly under the circumstances. By all accounts, Murray lived lavishly in Northern Africa. He, Allen, and 2 other friends from England, Gary Armitage and Mustafa Bassar, lived in a villa in Sousse, an upscale district popular with diplomats in Morocco's capital city. Now, they were riding around in Mercedes, flashy cars, buying flashy clothes and jewelry. They had the cash and they were blowing the cash. After a few months, Murray reportedly spent close to $1 million on a concrete manor around the corner from a cousin of Morocco's king. And you would see that he was just flaunting his cash. I don't know, but I get a sense that he felt his days were numbered and he might as well have all the fun he could until the day of reckoning. I could be wrong, but he was really blowing cash, and little did he know that shortly after his arrival in Morocco in March 2006, the Kent Police and Scotland Yard officials handling the investigation contacted Moroccan authorities and conveyed their concerns. So, unknown to Mari, almost from the day he arrived in the country, he was under 24-hour surveillance. And on 25th of June 2006, dozens of Moroccan police sealed off a portion of the mega mall in Rabat where Mari, Alain, Amitage, and Bashar were shopping. Now, because some of the suspects were experts in martial arts and also potentially carrying weapons, the small army of police officers who came there were also armed. And after a physical struggle, the 4 men were arrested. Now, a Kent police spokeswoman asserted that Mari was arrested for offenses linked to the £53 million Securitas raid. Now, when the Moroccan police went to Mari's residence, they found cocaine, marijuana, and the 4 men were charged with drug possession and for violently resisting when police arrested them at the mall. It's reported that they treated the police violently. And of course, they are martial artists, so something had to give. But that is not to justify their violence. Now, Mari's situation was somewhat more complicated because due to his Moroccan heritage, the UK's extradition request was initially denied. The British government has been putting a lot of pressure on Morocco, trying to get them to budge, but Moroccan nationals cannot be extradited from Morocco. That is the law, and the law should govern. That was the feedback from the Moroccan government. The Moroccan government discussed swapping Mari for Mohamed Kabouzi, a suspected terrorist living in London and sought for questioning in a 2003 Casablanca bombing. But the British government reportedly declined that exchange. So that was where the deadlock was. And while the extradition mess was being sorted out, Mari, at the behest of Britain, sits in a jail cell just outside Rabat. And hilariously, that is a caged fighter, now caged. It's tough for him, says his lawyer. He states that he is innocent. He has not participated in this robbery. He made money from his fights, and he doesn't need to do this. So that is what is happening. And so the whole thing seemed like, oh, Mari is now even claiming that he is innocent of everything. And Mari isn't granting interviews at the time of these things happening. And he would just, anyone who would be able to get close, he would just keep insisting on his innocence. And that has been the case. In recent times, people had tried comparing him with Conor McGregor, and he outrightly came and told them that they can't compare him with Conor McGregor because he, Lee Murray, is outright damn notorious, and Conor McGregor is nothing near him. What do you think about the rise and fall of Lee Murray? Which of his fights is your favorite? He'll be getting out in about 8 to 9 years from now, and he'll be in his 50s. He still insists that he will still be fighting in the cage. And as it stands now, even in prison, he's keeping fit, keeping in shape, and well, who knows? He might still be able to pull an upset over this challenge that seems to be looming against him with regards to his career in MMA now seemingly over due to his incarceration and the fact that he will be so old when he gets out. Leave your comments in the comment section, subscribe to this channel if you already haven't, and thank you for the support so far. Stay safe out there.